This trial wasn't about choosing country over party, even not that. This was about choosing country over Donald Trump, and 43 Republican members chose Trump.
Despite a bipartisan Senate vote to convict Donald Trump for incitement of insurrection, the former president's acquittal widens the schism in the Republican Party between his supporters and critics. Hello and welcome to Inside America with me, Ghida Fakhry. As widely anticipated, the second impeachment trial of former President Donald Trump ended in an acquittal. 57 senators in total, 48 Democrats, 2 independents, and 7 Republicans found Trump guilty, while 43 Republican senators found him not guilty of inciting the January 6th insurrection. While this was the most bipartisan vote in any U.S. president's impeachment trial, 10 additional guilty votes were needed for a conviction. A poll released this week showed that 58% of Americans believe Trump should have been convicted. Trump's acquittal has further factionalized the Republican Party, as the 7 Republican senators who crossed party lines to convict face censure and rebuke from their state GOP leaderships.
To the Republican Party, if you want to win and stop a socialist agenda, we need to work with President Trump. We can't do it without him. And to you, President Trump, you need to build the Republican Party stronger. I'm into winning.
Meanwhile, the Democrats and House managers who argued the case to convict Trump but failed to secure what would have been a first in U.S. history have come under sharp criticism for their decision to forego witness testimony after a majority of senators voted to grant that last-minute request. Many argue that the live testimony of a Republican congresswoman, Representative Herrera Beutler, who was willing to testify about a desperate call for help made by Republican House Leader Kevin McCarthy to President Trump while the Capitol was being overtaken by insurrectionists, would have been damning and could have made it more difficult for some Republican senators to acquit. So what are the short and long-term repercussions of Trump's acquittal? Joining me now is Congressman Benny Thompson, a Democrat who serves as the chairman of the House Committee on Homeland Security. Congressman Thompson, you called it a sad and appalling day for American democracy after the Senate voted to acquit. You've said that you feared for your own life on January 6th, as many others did. You just filed a federal lawsuit in the District of Columbia accusing Donald Trump, his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, and 2 extremist groups, the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, of conspiring to incite a riot on January 6th to keep lawmakers from certifying the election results. Would you have filed this lawsuit if the Senate had convicted Trump?
I doubt I would have, but clearly because the Senate did not do its job in actually convicting Donald Trump of those dastardly deeds, I had no choice in the matter, and now we move forward with the lawsuit.
You say you had no choice, but how much responsibility do Democrats themselves bear for not pressing harder for a conviction, for not calling witnesses when they have the chance to? Their testimony under oath could potentially have swayed a few more Republicans.
Well, it could have, and you know, as a politician in America, that's what you call after the event. Now we go forward with the lawsuit. I'm comfortable that the merits and the facts are there, and we now will leave it up to the court of law.
You leave it to the court of law, but the Senate's role was important in this, wasn't it? When Democrats themselves called this the worst offense by any president, the worst high crime in U.S. history, and then decide to conclude the trial in such a rush without allowing witness testimony, which could have shed light on what Donald Trump knew about the insurgency and when he knew it, isn't it fair to say that Democrats caved in? That they were more concerned about finishing the job early and getting home, some said for Valentine's, than allowing more time for the trial to proceed?
Well, as you know, the record of the witnesses did get put into the record, so we're happy with that. But as you and your viewers will see, we saw the acts of January 6th playing out before our very eyes. and we saw how complicit Donald Trump was in inviting people, not just to Washington on that day, but also encouraging them to come to the Capitol. And so we are comfortable where we are with it. And again, in our system of democracy, the courts is a proper venue to seek remedy.
But again, Congressman, though, if history will judge Republicans harshly for refusing to convict, how will it judge Democrats who seemingly backed down when they could have pushed this further?
Well, I'm convinced that the two impeachable acts that Donald Trump has had during his presidency seals his legacy in history as the worst president ever. So the notion that for whatever reason he didn't get convicted, but in the court of public opinion, he is convicted.
And you could argue that nothing was going to change Mitch McConnell's mind, the mind of the Senate minority leader. He decided to acquit while saying this shortly after the vote.
There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. If President Trump were still in office, I would have carefully considered whether the House managers proved their specific charge. But in this case, the question is moot because former President Trump is constitutionally not eligible for conviction.
McConnell also spoke about Trump's scheme to overturn the will of the American people, and he said that there is a criminal justice system to deal with this issue now. But if Trump is guilty of inciting an insurrection, in your view, and McConnell himself refers to a scheme by Trump, aren't we talking about a possible conspiracy? In other words, an attempted coup?
Well, there's no question with Donald Trump as president on January 6th, spoke to the crowd, encouraged them to come to the Capitol and stop the confirmation of the Electoral College votes by the House and Senate. He actually made that happen. He encouraged the people. There was no permit or anything secured by the people. They just took Donald Trump at his word, and they broke into the United States Capitol, killed Capitol policemen, caused other people to die. And so it's on Donald Trump's legacy, exactly what we have now. And obviously, the Senate didn't do its will. McConnell basically said he was guilty, but it's up to the courts. So the NAACP and myself and others will have our day in court to see whether or not Donald Trump is, as we believe, guilty of those charges.
And do you expect other lawmakers to join you in this lawsuit? You yourself have said that Trump endangered national security, that what happened at the Capitol was domestic terrorism incited by the former president and his enablers.
Oh, I'm confident now that the suit's filed. Other people like myself in the gallery during that time didn't know actually what was going on until we were escorted ceremoniously by security out of the gallery into a more secure area. I'm convinced they will join because it should not have happened, especially in the United States of America.
And now, as chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, someone who's been sounding the alarm for years, for the last 10 years on domestic terrorism, what do you expect from the 9/11 type commission that Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced this week to investigate what she also called the domestic terrorist attack on January 6th? Will this commission bring the evidence that was missing in the Senate trial?
Well, I think they will bring all the evidence forward. This is something like the 9/11 commission that was done right after the events of 9/11. This commission will look at it. It will be bipartisan, and I'm excited about the fact that we're moving forward, and the results from that commission, just like in the 9/11 commission, will become law. And so I look forward to working the legislation through my committee to make sure that we have the opportunity to have a real look at the events around January 6th and come up with some suggested remedies.
And finally, how confident are you that your lawsuit and other lawsuits that could be filed against Donald Trump will actually materialize into charges and that he will have his day in court as well and be forced to testify?
Well, and I think he should. In America, that's one of the choices you have when you have disputes. I look forward to something coming out of Georgia. As you know, there are things happening in New York around Donald Trump and his perceived illegal activities. So he will have, as a public citizen, the right to defend his actions before and during his tenure as president.
Congressman Benny Thompson, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, despite his acquittal in the Senate, Trump faces several criminal investigations. Prosecutors in the state of Georgia are looking into President Trump's alleged attempt to have the state's election results overturned. The criminal investigation is looking into the president's taped phone call with Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, who was pressured to, quote, find enough votes to hand Trump a win in the state.
And the people of Georgia are angry. The people of the country are angry. And there's nothing wrong with saying that, that you've recalculated.
Well, Mr. President, the challenge that you have is the data you have is wrong.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
After New York, Georgia is the second state where Trump faces a criminal investigation. For more on what is likely to unfold in Georgia, I'm joined by Democratic Representative Demetrius Douglas. He is a member of the Special Committee on Election Integrity in the Georgia House of Representatives. Representative Douglas, with prosecutors in Georgia now starting this criminal investigation, Trump could ultimately face prison time if he is charged and if he is convicted. How likely is it that District Attorney Fani Willis will take this to a grand jury and bring charges against Donald Trump?
Whenever you break the law, there are several consequences that one must face. The actual act of your duties and the actual outcome of what happened. And so with our local law enforcement, she's taking this very, very, very seriously, what has happened. And she's going to file and do her due diligence and have her background investigators investigate this to the fullest.
How significant could this be for the future of Donald Trump and Lindsey Graham? The probe has also widened to include the Republican senator who was chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. How serious a legal threat is this to both of them?
Well, this is a serious threat, but you got to keep in mind the hands of justice is normally tilted one way. And that's what we've seen in the African-American community, is that there are biases that the Lady Justice only tilts on the other side. It doesn't tilt our way. And so we want just equal and fair. And like our state Board of Elections Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, he actually spoke and said this is one of the most fair elections that we've had in our state. And there was no corruption here in our state. Now you got to keep in mind, 10% of everything you do, you're going to have some fallout. You're going to have a little ding here, a little ding there. But for the most part, this was a fair and equal election. But when you make the rules, I'm an old football guy, and I like to use analogies. When you're in the game and you know the rules of the game, and you get beat in that game, you don't come back and change all the rules to benefit yourself.
Is that what state legislatures on the Republican side are doing with the bills that they've been pushing forward, including in Georgia, to try to limit mail-in voting?
Yes, they have, and I'm really trying to wrap my mind around. They made these rules 15 years ago. Now, why all of a sudden these rules are obsolete or they need to be edited? Now, keep in mind, there is some changes that need to be made, but not this dramatic change. We need to get more money in the budget to help these workers because we're in a pandemic. Nobody expected this to happen. And we're still in a pandemic. And so this was the first of first for everything. We have to get things in perspective and get the people help that the workers that's in these locations that have a large population of people with mail-in ballots. We have to put money in the budget. That's number one. And number two, we got to find some help during election season. And so if they're able to put money in the budget so they can hire more staff, so we can be equipped when the time comes, the next election, I'm for it. But changing all the things that I've seen from our Senate side, there are 10, 11 bills that don't even make sense. It's voter suppression all the way.
But so if this is another attempt at voter suppression, as you say, what are you and other Democrats doing to counter this?
Well, you got to understand our meetings and our committees are set up where there is a 2-to-1, 3-to-1 ratio in every meeting that we go to. So we have to go to the meeting and ask questions and get on the record and ask viable questions so they can't violate our Constitution here in our state and federally. And also, we have to also advocate for those who don't have a voice. And it gets very difficult when you outnumber 3-to-1, the bill is going to pass out. And now we back down to the moral social issue. Do you have any morals? We've already seen what Congress did the other day. And it just trickles downhill. This snowball goes downhill. This is voter suppression 101 all over again. Well, actually 2.0.
All right. Representative Douglas, thank you very much for joining me and sharing your perspective. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me, and God bless you guys.
Republican lawmakers across the U.S. are now working to restrict voting access for millions of voters by introducing 165 new bills in 33 states. They argue these bills are about protecting election integrity, but Democrats warn this is a push for more voter suppression. The proposed legislation will make voting harder by placing limitations on voting by mail, imposing stricter voter identification requirements, and scaling back policies that facilitate the registration of large numbers of voters. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, there are already 3 times more restrictive voting bills today than there were this time last year. In Pennsylvania, where Trump and his supporters launched unsuccessful legal actions to overturn the election results, Republican lawmakers are pushing a bill that would repeal the state's 2019 bipartisan no-excuse absentee voting law. One of the 25 Republican co-sponsors of the bill that aims to roll back Pennsylvania's mail-in voting law, which allows vote by mail without the requirement of a cause, is State Representative Mike Puskarik, the bill's prime sponsor. He joins us now. Representative Puskarik, you are the prime sponsor of this bill. You say it is about voter integrity, but your critics say that taking away the ability of voters to cast a ballot by mail without the requirement of an excuse is an effort to disenfranchise voters and limit their vote. What are you trying to achieve by changing the rules?
So this legislative package seeks to give the Pennsylvania legislature a starting point to really try to comb through some of the issues and irregularities that we had with this past election cycle. This rhetoric that we're trying to disenfranchise voters is just simply inaccurate. That's why we included House Bill 18, which makes Election Day a statewide holiday. And really that is a call to action to try to get people from all walks of life, all political ideologies, to get back involved in our political process and help execute Election Day.
But how do you do that by making it harder for people to register and vote?
But nothing about this legislation makes it more difficult to register, to participate. What this does is it seeks to eliminate the no excuse mail-in vote specifically, while keeping in place the absentee vote that we already have constitutionally here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Really with House Bill 18 and making it a statewide holiday, as I said, it's a call to action, because the only way that we are going to, I think, truly bring integrity back to this electoral process is to get people from all walks of life involved.
But is this really about election integrity? Because there's no evidence that mail-in votes were a risk to voter integrity. In fact, you know that the Department of Homeland Security said in November that the election was the most secure in US history. The FBI said there was no evidence of national voter fraud, including through mail-in voting, and at least 60 cases of alleged fraud brought by Trump and the Republicans were thrown out of court, including in Pennsylvania.
Well, truly, this is just about giving us a level playing field from which to work from. Currently, we have in question probably somewhere north of 200,000 ballots that were counted additional over those who were active voters. So those are questions that we've never gotten answers from. Our Secretary of State, the Wolf administration, nobody has been able to provide us with accurate information regarding where those ballots came from.
Well, that's not really true, because a Republican judge in Pennsylvania said these were only speculative accusations, not proof of rampant corruption. The only evidence was one attempt to vote on behalf of a dead person, and it turned out to be a Trump supporter. So why try to change the rules that you yourself agreed to just 2 years ago in a bipartisan vote?
Because these rules were not what we had agreed to. Act 77, as passed, was substantially different as a piece of legislation. We had safety checks, signature verification, quite a number of safety protocols were put in place at that time, and I might add, were heavily debated by the legislature. It wasn't until Act 77 was passed that our Supreme Court, the Wolf administration, went and actively started trying to remove a lot of these safety checks, which led to a lot of the questions that we still have not had answers to.
But this was just 2 years ago, 2019, and there was overwhelming support from Republicans in the House and in the Senate in Pennsylvania. So what happened between then and now? I mean, let's call a spade a spade. Isn't this an attempt to limit the vote of minorities and African Americans who tend to vote by mail and who tend to vote Democrat?
Not at all. And like I said, we are preserving the absentee balloting program. So you will still be able to vote by mail in Pennsylvania. It's just you're going to have a legitimate reason. What we found throughout this process was this was something that was exploited pretty much at every level of the election process. We had people that were ballot harvesting in the cities of Pittsburgh and Philadelphia by registering numerous homeless people at condemned properties, things like that were happening that, it truly was a death by 1,000 cuts.
But 29 states plus Washington, D.C. allow mail-in voting without an excuse. This isn't really about the electoral system being vulnerable to fraud. Let's face it, it's about Republican lawmakers trying to deny the will of the voters by tilting the rules to win election. What public purpose is being served by making it harder for people to vote?
Well, again, by having House Bill 18, we're giving everybody the day off and encouraging the private sector as well to participate. This is about getting everybody back to the table and having a level playing field, like I said, from which we can work. If we're walking into election day and one party has an advantage over the other from the start, then we don't have free and fair elections.
But isn't this about Republicans realizing that they've lost support in the last elections in the suburbs, among women, among white college-educated men? Shouldn't you be trying to change the message, change the policies? Or is the only way to win fair election to try to make them less fair?
I wouldn't say that, especially in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, that we saw that at all. Actually, the voters in the Commonwealth returned 3 additional state House members to the Pennsylvania legislature, I believe because they liked the direction that the Republicans were taking things. But really, I think from, like you had mentioned, it's truly not about disenfranchising people. It's just about creating a level playing field.
All right, Representative Puskarik, good to have you on the program. Thank you so much.
Appreciate the opportunity.
While Citizen Trump may have been acquitted by the Senate, he's been convicted in the court of public opinion, with almost 60% of Americans saying he should have been held accountable for inciting the failed insurrection at the Capitol. Worse for Trump, in addition to potential legal exposure in New York, he may be looking down the barrel at criminal charges in Georgia for attempts at overturning the will of the people. In that, he isn't alone. The Republican Party, which still considers Trump as its anchor and beacon, is pursuing essentially the same objective by drafting bill after bill, primarily in battleground state legislatures, to constrain the electoral participation, in effect, of primarily African Americans and other minorities who vote predominantly for Democratic candidates. Electoral trends suggest that higher participation rates favor Democrats. Trump himself had warned that Republicans cannot prevail in future elections unless casting one's ballot is made more difficult. Gerrymandering is no longer sufficient. After the fateful January 6th tragic events, this conclusion is even more acute for the post-insurrection GOP, whose Trumpian base may be hardened, but whose traditional Republican voters feel alienated. And so, in short, Democrats failed to have the twice-impeached president convicted. But they must be relishing the GOP's predicament, as its reluctance to sever ties with Donald Trump can only prolong the recovery phase of the party, or even bring about its splinter, after its Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell voted to acquit, yet spoke to indict Donald J. Trump. That's all from me, Ghida Fakhry. Send me your thoughts and comments from the entire team in Washington. Thanks for watching.